Doug hardly needs any introduction. I'm sure most of you have heard him before if you've come to one of these talks. I looked over his CV just this afternoon, all 27, 30 odd pages of it. Many articles, 3 books, many edited collections, edited books, pages upon pages of invited lectures, plenary lectures. Looking at the CV, it's very clear that what we have is really a world-class scholar, and we've been really privileged in Calgary, at the University of Calgary, to have Doug with us. And so it's a privilege and a pleasure to welcome him to the stage now and hear his words on how to teach theology and religious studies, or just religious studies, I suppose.
Thank you, Tinu. Let me turn myself on here. It is hard to believe that I've been here 17 years at the University of Calgary. And I look out and I see colleagues and students, former students, and as Tinu maybe was going to say, and maybe as I'll say, this is in a sense my last lecture. I'm retiring this summer from the University of Calgary, and so it's an opportunity to do some reflection, and maybe that does reflect kind of the spirit in which I'm speaking this evening. In December 98, I had my interview, and I remember Leslie Kawamura picking me up at the hotel, the Best Western Village Park Inn, and driving me to the university, and kind of wanting to, I think, make me aware of some of the traditions that I was joining when I came here. And I'm going to reflect on that in my talk in a minute as well. It has been a great career. I've never for a minute regretted coming to the University of Calgary. I did teach for 3 years at a Baptist Bible College in Vancouver. I taught for 13 years at Trinity Western University in BC, and then 17 years here. And so that adds up to a career. My writing isn't finished, but I guess my teaching at U of C is. So I want to reflect on, I guess as the title indicates, I noticed in the Herald it said, the title was, Should We Study and Teach Religion? I don't know if anybody saw that. That's not my title. The title is, How Should We Study and Teach Religion? That's my topic. My field, of course, has been Christian history, and a special focus on the German Reformation and German Pietism. And I think, in many ways, as I'll suggest, this has been a journey that is both academic and personal, trying to understand the roots of a faith in which I was nurtured, a faith that, of course, has informed our culture. And my curiosity kept me probing, what is this faith all about? What does this faith represent? What are its traditions? What are its sources? Those are questions that have really motivated me over the years. I have tended to focus on radical expressions out of the mainstream of Protestant Christianity. Somebody has called these people homeless minds. My supervisor, Werner Packel, liked that phrase. It comes from Peter Berger. Homeless minds, people that in various stages of European history were persecuted, and many of whom made their way to North America in the 18th century to flee that persecution. And my own heritage is part of that. The Swiss Anabaptist roots making way to North America in the 18th century is actually my family heritage. So I guess in some ways the academic study is trying to retrace something of that ancient heritage. I am the 10th generation in North America. My father grew up speaking a form of German and did not speak English till he went to school, which is quite remarkable for he would have been the 9th generation in North America. So I was aware of these traditions, and I think my career has been partly an effort to learn more about that. So my main questions this evening are, how should we study and teach religion? What motives and methods should we use? And as you'll see, I hope, when I began this talk, I thought, is anybody going to be interested in this? Will I have anything to say on this topic? In our careers as scholars, we typically apply to present at a conference. And months in advance, we need to submit a topic and even sometimes an abstract of what our paper will be. And I think my colleagues here will identify with me when I say often the paper ends up being very different than what the topic and abstract was when we applied to present. And that's the case in some ways tonight. I had an idea of what I might talk about. When the paper was finished, it did look a little bit different. So first I want to consider religion as a subject of curiosity and fascination for myself. How did I get to be a professor of religious studies? For our culture, what is this interest and preoccupation that our society seems to have with religion, especially among people who don't like it? They just can't stop talking about it. And then for the university, the fact, why do we have departments of religious studies in our universities? So I want to look at, in general way, at that fascination with religion. And then I want to look at what some present-day scholars are saying about how we should study religion. These are not scholars with whom I entirely agree or disagree, but I think their voice needs to be out there. And then finally, I want to reflect on my own approach to the teaching of religious studies. And I guess I have summed that up pretty much, as you can see if you have the handout. How many of you have a handout in your hand? Does anybody have a handout? Did that handout get brought in? Okay. Okay, you will have a handout shortly. Some of us had a little bit too much fun before this event tonight. I won't mention any names. My point tonight, I would sum up my point this way. My own approach to studying and teaching religion is in terms of balancing curiosity and respect. And I think we do our students a disservice if we fail to keep the balance and allow both of these to inspire our study and teaching. So curiosity and respect is kind of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So first of all, religion as a subject of curiosity and fascination for myself, for our culture, and for the university. How does a person end up becoming a professor of religious studies? Those of us who do teach religious studies will encounter people on the campus, and when they find out in other fields, and when they find out we teach religion, they look a bit confused. First of all, surprised maybe that we do teach religion at the University of Calgary. Then the second question is, well, do you prepare people to be priests? And so there's a bit of confusion about our discipline. So how does a person get to be a professor of religion? In my own case, it had to do with growing up in a home where religion was taken very seriously. My mother taught Sunday school, my father sang in the church choir, and the rhythm of church attendance and family prayer was part of my nurturing from when I can remember. And I think, well, when I was about 12, my parents experienced a born-again conversion experience. And about that time, we stopped attending the United Church of Canada with its new curriculum. This is in the 60s, and we became Baptists. So as I said, I was 12 years old, and this was a fairly momentous change because both sets of grandparents attended the United Church of Canada. The Anabaptist roots were generations behind, and so I was curious about this. I was curious about these religious denominations, about decisions that my parents had taken, and so I think, to be quite honest, in many ways that brought me to where I am today. It was my curiosity about this religious, I wouldn't say conflict, but decisions that were made. Obviously, there were different perspectives on what Christianity represented. And I think that inspired a lot of my desire to study religion. So we did attend a Baptist church. I attended a Presbyterian seminary. I was a Baptist pastor for 4 years full-time and 4 years part-time before I returned to university to get a PhD in the history of the Reformation. And as they say, the rest is history. Religion is also a subject of curiosity in our society, and I want to reflect on that for a minute. In Western society, even non-religious individuals can't seem to stop talking about religion. And I'm thinking of people such as Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens. There are others. Sam Harris, that's the name I was looking for. After 9/11, it seems that these new atheists, who I guess rightly so, were quite indignant that religious belief could lead to such disastrous consequences as 9/11, began treating religion as a whole as something bad, and said so quite vigorously and bluntly and publicly. Richard Dawkins himself, the evolutionary biologist, is probably the best known of these figures. I find it interesting, I don't know if you've found out much about Richard Dawkins lately. He's losing fans at a pretty furious rate. One fellow who joins him in his anti-theism, a former supporter, observed that Dawkins has moved from a mostly reasonable critique of religion into anti-religious extremism that flirts with outright racism. When Dawkins decries Muslims, one can't help but wonder, says this former disciple, where the line between this revered scientist and Donald Trump lies. So he's become it's become a religious obsession with him to oppose any and every form of religion. Christopher Hitchens is a very different figure. Before he died from cancer at age 62 in December 2011, Christopher Hitchens engaged in many debates about the existence of God, wrote essays, also basically opposing religion in its various forms, culminating in a book entitled God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. There he argued that God did not make us, we made God. And he raised a host of objections to faith. It misrepresents the origins of the cosmos. Instead of following what science teaches us about evolution, for example, it teaches instantaneous creation 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, that kind of thing. And of course, Hitchens has no patience for that. Religion is grounded in wishful thinking. And in the West, he suggests religion is guilty of gross moral failure. People who are religious seem to be even less moral than people who are not religious. Those are some of his arguments. Hitchens reveals that his own father was a Baptist, his mother was Jewish, and over the course of his life, he identified as an Anglican, he attended a Methodist school, he converted by marriage to Greek Orthodoxy, and then was remarried and married by a rabbi. And then facetiously, he suggests that maybe he should be the one to update William James' variety of religious experience. He's experienced it. I think it's important to note that Hitchens has retained, unlike Dawkins, Hitchens has retained a very respectful tone, I would say, for the most part, towards religion. And I think he needs to be honored for that. In his book, he says that he's stayed up late and long with religious friends, discussing, of course, religion. He says, these friends irritate me when they suggest that I'm a seeker, which I am not. He says, when I go to the synagogue, I cover my head. When I go to the mosque, I take off my shoes. When my father died and was buried in a chapel overlooking Portsmouth, I gave the address from the pulpit and selected as my text Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. After publishing this book, he went on a book tour through the southern states and debated people about the themes of the book. After the book tour, returning to Washington, D.C., his home, he's moved to America, he was having lunch at a trendy Cafe Milano in Georgetown with his family, his wife and daughter. Sitting next to them at this little restaurant for lunch was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. Hitchens leaned over and said, "My Lord Archbishop, it's Christopher Hitchens." "Good gracious," the Archbishop responded. "We were just discussing your book." I'd suggest that Hitchens' fascination, I think he's a good example of my point, his fascination with religion has remained with him throughout his life. On the anniversary of the King James Bible in 2011, shortly before he died, he wrote an article in praise of the King James Bible. And of course, William Tyndale, who has a large part of contribution to that Bible. He called William Tyndale one of the greatest literary dissidents and subversives who ever lived, the 16th century William Tyndale. And then Hitchens expressed high praise for the Bible translation. Quote, "Though I'm sometimes reluctant to admit it, there really is something timeless in the Tyndale King James translation. For generations, it provided a common stock of references and allusions, rivaled only by Shakespeare in this respect. It resounded in the minds and memories of literate people, as well as of those who acquired it only by listening." And then he cited these examples of how that Bible lives on in our language. "The powers that be are ordained of God. When I was a child, I spake as a child. Eat, drink, and be merry. From strength to strength. Salt of the earth, our Father, which art in heaven." In idioms such as the fatted calf and casting pearls before swine. And then, referring to this passage in Philippians, he wrote, "I chose this passage at my father's funeral because of its haunting, elusive character, which will be with me at the last hour." Hitchens, I suggest, could not escape a certain fascination with religion. Finally, and somewhat surprisingly, religion is a subject of curiosity and fascination in the modern Western university. How did religion come to be a part of the curriculum of North American universities? In her 2010 presidential address at the AAR, the American Academy of Religion, Ann Tavis spoke on religion in the humanities and the humanities in the university. And she reflected on the making of religion in the modern university. She observed that the tripartite division of natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities only emerged in the early 20th century. At the turn of the 20th century, there was intense disciplinary formation in the natural and social sciences. There is the founding of anthropology, sociology, psychology by figures such as James George Fraser, Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, Max Weber, William James, and Sigmund Freud. Led by literary studies, the humanities emerged in the 1920s as disciplines that, over against the supposedly value-free objective sciences, promoted human values and enriched our human self-awareness. And religious studies belongs in that group of disciplines. It's hard to believe, but in Canadian universities in the early 1960s, no courses were offered on Hinduism, Buddhism, or Islam. Only the study of Christianity was available, usually in a theology program in a church college or seminary. The study of religion as we know it today emerged over the course of the 1960s. During this decade, departments of religion appeared in public universities throughout North America. Today, I'm wondering if I should turn off and just this particular, I think I'm going to turn that off. Will that work? It will be. The American Academy of Religion was founded in 1963. According to the AAR website, the AAR, the American Academy of Religion, has grown to some 9,000 members. My colleagues and I have been to some of their conferences. They're usually more than that. Over 10,000 delegates is not unusual. Members are largely faculty and graduate students at colleges, universities, and divinity schools in North America, with a growing percentage located at institutions of higher education in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Furthermore, just to illustrate the growth of this discipline, in 1971, the Canadian journal Studies in Religion, Sciences Religieuses, was founded. The Department of Religious Studies at the University of Calgary was launched in 1976. So we're having our 40th anniversary this year, with 5 faculty members: Terry Penellum, Philosophy of Religion; Harold Coward, Hinduism and Psychology of Religion; Peter Craigie, Biblical Studies; Bernard Cook, Christianity; and Leslie Kawamura in Buddhism. All of these first faculty were excellent teachers and active researchers and active in publishing. This Calgary program, our department, had two types of courses: descriptive courses on the major traditions of Eastern and Western religions, and interpretive courses, the nature of religion, including philosophy of religion, sociology of religion, and thematic courses, comparative courses. This program was designed mainly by Harold Coward, using a model he had observed at McMaster University. Coward credits the influence of Terry Penellum, former Dean of Arts and Science at U of C, for this program winning acceptance in the General Faculties Council, the infamous General Faculties Council at the University of Calgary. The program had to be approved, of course, by the university before we could start teaching courses in that program. In his 2014 book, 50 Years of Religious Studies in Canada, Harold Coward suggests that the founding figures of religious studies in our country were Wilfred Cantwell Smith, who taught at McGill and founded the department at Dalhousie in 1973, and George Grant, who headed up graduate studies at McMaster from 1961 to 1980. Thanks to these two figures, writes Coward, Canada emerged from narrow theological understandings of religion to a more open academic way of studying religion that proposed a broader, non-sectarian approach and a commitment to religious pluralism. George Grant believed that religious studies could tell us something about what it means to be human. I wonder if I could just put this beside you there. Great. And so these two men, suggests Coward, are the people to whom we are indebted today for helping found this discipline, and especially at U of C. Harold Coward suggests that the focus of religious studies should be to help students gain appreciation for the wisdom of religion, basically to make this a better world and for us all to get along with one another. The university departments of religion I've just spoken about were profoundly shaped by these divinity schools that had preceded them. And as a result, our discipline has been under a good degree of criticism in recent years and decades. Religion scholars, say the critics, are too friendly to religion in general, and to religious experience in particular, to subject the discipline to rigorous historical and critical analysis. That's the argument, that religious studies today, according to some, is still too much like the theology programs that they've replaced in many universities. Another criticism of this field is that even the concept of world religions is used, usually identifying about 12 major religions, to reflect a Western European claim to universal understanding. Michigan scholar Tomoko Mezuzawa argues that Western scholars have treated religion as their definitional plaything. They want to distinguish the West from the rest, and do so invariably from a European point of view. What we call pluralism is really still European intellectual universalism. In other words, Christians are still controlling the study of world religions. So those are some of the critics and what they have said over the years. This curriculum program I've talked about that grew in the 60s and 70s has been matched by high student enrollments up to the new millennium. I would say in the last 10 years that has begun to change. And we have witnessed a decline in enrollment at the University of Calgary in religious studies, and that's part of a decline that many humanities disciplines have experienced in Calgary and elsewhere. Although numbers may be down, I believe the quality of student interest and engagement remains high. And I'm happy to say that this term I'm having one of my best teaching experiences ever in teaching a course in modern religious autobiography, looking at Teresa of Avila, George Fox, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, and others. So against this backdrop now, I want to, I've almost stopped in class, I would say, now, are there any questions? But we'll save the questions for the end. If there is a question, we'll save it for the end. Why is there a general decline in the humanities? You know, I'd be interested to hear a general discussion about that among even people here. I have a couple things to suggest. I think maybe with the pressures of the economy, families, students are under pressure to come out with a credential for a good job. And so the idea that you follow your interest in liberal arts and then maybe do some professional study even after that, there's more of a rush to get into the job market. I would think that's maybe part of it. So what about questions of motive and method in terms of modern scholarship? I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but there's been since about 2012 an online website for the Religious Studies Project, RSP. Two British scholars at Lancaster University in Edinburgh have set up this program, quote, to help disseminate contemporary issues in religious studies to a wider audience. We aim to provide engaging, concise, reliable accounts of the main concepts, traditions, scholars, and methodologies in the contemporary study of religion. That's pretty ambitious. And so you go to this site and you can see podcasts, 30-minute podcasts, interviewing they've got 170 of these podcasts. So they're interviewing many of the major thinkers today on issues of religious studies. Now, fortunately, I'm not going to talk about these 100 and some scholars of religion that they cover in their podcasts. I want to look at two. In fact, two Canadian scholars, Donald Wiebe and Russell McCutcheon. Donald Wiebe is a professor at Trinity College at the University of Toronto. He grew up in the Mennonite Brethren denomination. His areas of study are philosophy of religion, scientific study of religion, method and theory. He's the perfect person for my talk. Method and theory in the study of religion. Maybe a good place to begin in discussing Donald Wiebe is his review of Harold Coward's book. And by the way, have the handouts been passed out yet? Perfect. Glad to hear that. So if you look at my handout, at the bibliography at the bottom, you have Harold Coward, 50 Years of Religious Studies in Canada. I just referred to that book a few minutes ago in my talk. Well, Donald Wiebe wrote a review of that book. And he lamented that for Harold Coward, the idea of religious studies aiming at objective theoretical knowledge for the sake of knowledge alone seems totally foreign. Quote, I find the positive light in which Coward's account prevents religious studies in Canada deplorable. Although in substance I believe it's very nearly the whole truth. It seems to me that Coward's book presents a challenge to departments of religious studies in Canada to show they have not stayed true to the Smith-Grant vision of the field, to show either how they were never caught up in that vision or how they have moved their departments well beyond it. I mentioned these two founders of religious studies, Wilfred Cantwell Smith, George Grant. As far as Wiebe is concerned, they got us off on the wrong foot. They made a very bad start for religious studies in Canada, according to Donald Wiebe. He wrote an article in 1988, and that's also listed in your bibliography, that directly addresses the questions of motive and method that we use in the study of religion. Why the academic study of religion, motive and method in the study of religion. And I think he's right that there is a close relationship between motive and method. Wiebe wants to give a precise formulation of the aim of religious studies and then explain the implications this has for the method of the study of religion and how it should be taught in the academic setting. According to Wiebe, the academic study of religion must be done for academic reasons alone, not as an instrument in the achievement of religious, cultural, political, or other ends. The goal of academic study of religion, he writes, is understanding the phenomena of religion in scientifically warrantable claims about religious traditions. In terms of method, Weeb says the method should be essentially the scientific method. Like the scientific naturalist with a concern to collect, describe, and classify phenomena, so the religious studies scholar should operate. Quote, the range of data is enormous. Rites, rituals, beliefs, practices, any expression of religion, and so on. Some depth of perspective in the descriptive accounts is provided by looking at comparing fields to each other, different religions to each other, and looking at the history of these religions. Such study involves use of frameworks and theories sometimes to give a larger understanding than just the particulars that you may be looking at when you study religion. For Weeb, this kind of study is totally incompatible with theology. Quote, all uncritical thinking about God or the gods that rests on revelation and authority, on the presumption of theism, that refuses to countenance the possible non-existence of God is confessional theology. Such theology operates entirely within the framework of religious assumptions, within a particular tradition, and is incompatible with the basic minimum presuppositions for academic study of religion. Academic study of religion must be objective, neutral, and scientific. So for Weeb, both the motive and the method add up to a religion as a positive science marked by vigorous scientific neutrality. So much for Donald Weeb. Russell McCutcheon was a student of Donald Weeb at the University of Toronto in his graduate studies. He also studied at Queen's. McCutcheon wrote a book, and this is also on your list, called Critics, Not Caretakers, Redescribing the Public Study of Religion. In this book, McCutcheon argues that scholars of religion should see themselves as culture critics, that religion is really just an expression of human culture and should be critiqued and examined as such. So that's what scholars should be doing. What they should not be doing is nurturing or enhancing or promoting religion in any shape or form. As a culture critic, the public scholar of religion's contribution is examining religion's rhetoric with a good degree of suspicion. For McCutcheon, religion is the label we give to a collection of artful but ordinary human doings. Public scholars of religion study the way communities artfully deploy discourses on topics such as evil, end times, and non-obvious beings. So you can see McCutcheon is challenging scholars who see themselves as caretakers of religion to give up that role and to take on the role of critics and challengers of religion. Just to sum up, McCutcheon again, the scholar's role is critical and oppositional, uncovering rhetorical window dressings. This also includes looking for political motivations that may be behind religion. Religion is often about more than just religion. My response to Weeb and McCutcheon is to say that I certainly think that there is a place for the kind of rigorous scientific study that they talk about. I call that curiosity. I think there is a place for unbridled curiosity. I don't think there are any questions that we shouldn't ask. I think all questions are open game. And insofar as they're promoting rigorous questioning, as you'll see in a minute as well, I have no problem with that. For me, we can legitimately bring our curiosity and questioning to religion. I don't think that a confessional commitment necessarily prevents us from doing this questioning. I think that's maybe the difference that I have. I'm not sure why they feel threatened by having what I would call a certain respect for religion. I'm not sure why that is incompatible with a questioning mind. As scholars, we all have our own views on religion. Of course, we don't promote these in the classroom or even necessarily in our scholarship. So now we come to my own perspective on these questions. So on your handout, about halfway down, near the bottom, balancing curiosity and respect in studying and teaching religion, some reflections. I have spent my career teaching primarily Christianity. Those of us in religious studies, of course, have to teach the famous intro courses, beloved by students and beloved by professors. Haha. And of course, in the intro courses, for example, the 201 course is an introduction to Western religions that includes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And quite frankly, teaching a course like that is really broadening and stimulating for me as a professor. If you want to learn something, try teaching it. Then you learn very quickly. And so much of what I know about Judaism and Christianity is from teaching that course, to be perfectly honest, which is a good thing. But I've primarily spent my time teaching courses in Christian history, looking at the early church, the beginnings of Christianity, the rise of monasticism and Christendom in the Middle Ages, the Reformation and the rise of denominations in the modern era. My consistent goal, I would say, has been to encourage students to enter into the world's lives, practices, and ideas in the Christian past. I think this takes some imagination. This takes some imagination. It takes some empathy. As somebody has said, the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And so it's, reading these Christian sources is not like picking up the Calgary Herald. It takes a little bit of work and a bit of imagination, and it takes some background knowledge, of course, as well. I remember in a class years ago, this wasn't in Calgary, a student asking me, was Gregory the Great a fundamentalist? Was he a good evangelical? Gregory the Great, 6th century. And I remember trying to convince the student to avoid making our time and our worldview the norm for somebody living in the past, but to take past figures and communities on their own terms. And I think my great joy has been to try to do that myself in my teaching and encourage students to do that in their own study. And so I would sum up my approach in terms of curiosity and respect. I like to talk about a childlike interest. I have four grandchildren. And one of the joys of grandchildren is just seeing what sponges they are, not just in terms of language, but in terms of the world. And discovering the way things are and their fascination with that. And I think one of the great virtues in a student is somehow preserving that childlike curiosity, that love of learning. What really happened? I think combined with the childlike curiosity, there should be a dose of adult cynicism and maturity, because that, I think, will drive us to look beneath the surface of things, to look for other motives, not to take things at face value. So I think both those kinds of curiosity are important, the childlike kind and the adult kind, which of course is more cynical. Somebody has said, if you love gossip, then history of Christianity is the field for you. You learn all these nasty things about people that you thought were saints. As scholars of religion, we need to keep these two motives in balance, I think, because the other factor, of course, is empathy and respect, so that we don't jump into making dismissive judgments that sabotage patient study and reflection. I think we tend to say, I think we do in everyday life, first impressions, Well, in our studies, sometimes we have a first impression. We think we understand this historical figure, this historical movement, this historical writing, and we jump to judgment. And as my students know, when we read historical sources, I resist the tendency they have to jump to judgment, to bring a critique. And I say, hold on, let's first be sure we know what is happening in the context here, what this person is really saying, where they are coming from. And only after we're sure we understand what is really being said in this historical context, only then will allow students to say, well, I think this is crazy, I disagree. Rather than letting that be the reflex, I try to force students just to hold off. And of course, very often when we take that step of understanding, the judgments aren't the same, if they're there at all. I think that's an important pause to make before judging, understand. Curiosity before judgment. And of course, as you can see in my handout, for me, this approach that I'm suggesting of curiosity combined with respect is exemplified by four figures. And I've listed these 4 figures on my handout under 1, curiosity and critique in the study of religion, Max Weber and Dermot McCullough. And respect in the study of religion, William James and Charles Taylor. I'd like to point out that although I'm giving Max Weber and Dermot McCullough as my examples of curiosity, I would argue they were also respectful of religion. And although I'm giving William James and Charles Taylor as examples of respect and sympathy for religion, they also had amazing intellectual curiosity. I think they had the balance very nicely. So first of all, let's look at Max Weber. Max Weber is actually one of my academic heroes. He is a fascinating figure. I guess what I like in heroes is when they have to surmount great difficulties. And Max Weber fits into that category very nicely. Max Weber's parents had a fractious relationship. And after his father had been treating his mother particularly badly on one occasion, Max Weber dressed down his father and treated his father very badly. And within days, his father was dead. And as you can imagine, Max Weber experienced huge remorse over that coincidence of things, their fight and then his father dying. And for some years, he could not work. He couldn't get out of bed. He tried to read, and the print would just swim before his eyes. He was unable to work for years. And finally, he was able to do a bit of work in bed. This is what you or I would probably do as well if we just wanted to pass the time. He began to teach himself Russian as he was lying in bed. The first book he wrote after this experience of depression was The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, one of the great books in the field, and still a reference point for many of us. So Max Weber is, to me, an amazing figure who, against great adversity, managed to produce amazing scholarship. So I just want to say a couple of things about it. I guess what impresses me most about him is his intellectual curiosity. Because the Protestant ethic book I just mentioned was part of a much larger project. And that project was the economic ethic of the world religions. Max Weber wasn't just looking at Christianity, he was interested in Eastern religions as well. And I know that scholars of Eastern religions don't like a lot of his work. But I guess the interesting point is that he wanted to get a perspective on where Christianity fitted in comparison to other world religions, to get a sense of what made it unique. And so I think although he may not be most reliable on Asian religions, I think the perspective that gave him when he came back to Christianity proved to be invaluable. So in his studies of religion in China, in India, he was trying to delineate religious orientations that were in contrast to the West, so that Western religion would stand out even more. So you can guess where this is coming from, where he's coming from. In his book, The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, 1904-1905, he argued that Calvinism, a form of Protestant religion, supplied the moral energy and drive for the rise of capitalism. So you have a form of religion responsible for dramatic new innovation in terms of economics. He further refined his argument to suggest that the more sectarian versions of Calvinism, the Puritan sects, these groups that were often persecuted, they were not the great factory owners, but they made amazing workers. They were noteworthy for their discipline at the lower levels of the capitalist enterprise. And then finally, he looked at the German pietists, and he observed that they seemed to make good office clerks, good laborers, good domestic workers. They all were influenced by this this Calvinist religion, but in an interesting way, and unique, of course, in terms of world economics, they seemed to play a part in a rise of what we now call capitalism, or know as capitalism. Now, I find it interesting that in all this careful study that Weber underwent and undertook, he himself was religiously indifferent. And I don't know if my colleagues can remember maybe some of you have heard this expression. As he put it, ich bin religiös unmusikalisch. In matters of religion, I'm tone deaf. I'm totally unmusical, because it's kind of a fascinating metaphor there. When it comes to religion, I'm unmusical, just got no talent for it. I'm useless when it comes to religion. In terms of his own personal life, he was totally indifferent personally. He had this amazing contribution academically to looking at religion and various world contexts. He himself was not a religious man. And so I think given that, to me, it's all the more impressive, the way he could study religion with empathy. One scholar, Patrick Collinson, said, if there's anything wrong with his work, it's that he has too much empathy for the psychological condition of these Calvinist believers that he examines. Amazing empathy, which I would call also respect. Now, a contemporary expression of this driving curiosity, I think, would be Dermot McCullough. And if you look again at my bibliography here, Dermot McCullough wrote the book Christianity, the First 3,000 Years. Came out Penguin 2009. It's a massive survey of the history of Christianity. One reviewer put it this way: this 1,000-page, it's over 1,000 pages, this 1,000-page history of Christianity, from Christianity's beginnings till now, is a daunting object. It's as big as a bus, and a bit of a challenge to those who like their information in bite-sized portions. McCullough himself comes from 3 generations of Anglican clergy. He was the only child of an Anglican country rector. And although I don't think any longer identifies as a Christian, he calls himself a candid friend of Christianity. And in many Sundays, he'll still go to High Anglican liturgy at St. Barnabas's in Oxford. Now, I think he exemplifies the kind of curiosity, he exemplifies the approach to Christianity and its history that I admire and try to emulate. In his introduction, McCullough says, I feel immensely privileged to have been trained as a professional historian, because my training is a call to discipline my strong feelings of both affection and anger towards my own Christian inheritance. That training may help me to tell a story which readers can consider fair and sympathetic. My aim has been to seek out what I see as the good in the varied forms of the Christian faith, while pointing clearly to what I think is foolish and dangerous in them. Religious faith can be close to madness. It has brought human beings to acts of criminal folly, as well as to the highest achievements of goodness, creativity, and generosity. I tell the story of both extremes. And so he describes some of the ways in which individuals, he says, were turned around by Christianity, but also the ways in which they could turn around what Christianity meant to suit their own purposes. For McCullough, the good historian must do his own detective work, read into the gaps, listen for voices that weren't recorded. So now we then come to my final point, and that is respect in the study and teaching of religion, embodied by William James and Charles Taylor. William James' famous book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, has been summarized nicely as follows: a superb presentation of a large number of case histories, described and analyzed with a sensitive sympathy, and arranged under a practical system of categories. Sympathy and respect mark this book in a fundamental way. James felt that he was obligated to show some respect so long as he felt religious people to be sincere and serious. If they were sincere and serious, then they deserved his respect. That was his attitude. One scholar observed that James had a natural respect for that which had evoked reverence. James sought to be viciously fair-minded, even when discussing cranks and geniuses and unclassified waifs. I'll read that sentence again. I love it. He sought to be viciously fair-minded, even when discussing cranks and geniuses and unclassified waifs. And I think in this respect, he is a model for scholars today. How do we account for this great fairness and respect that James had toward virtually all forms of religion that he encountered? I think the key influence was his father, Henry James. As a young man, Henry had intended to enter the Presbyterian ministry. However, after much reflection and life experience, he turned to Swedenborg and Swedenborgianism. The James family was marked by high seriousness, high spirits, and excellent talk. When his father died in 1882, William James reflected on the value and meaning of religion in father's sense in the mental life and destiny of man. So you can see that this was a respect that he basically learned from his father and that shaped his scholarship for the rest of his life. I think another factor in James' approach to religion was basically his humanity and his sympathy for the weaknesses of human nature. His book, Varieties of Religious Experience, has a subtitle. Anybody know what that subtitle is? A Study in Human Nature. On one occasion, William James took Harvard students with him to two mental institutions, or we would say mental hospitals, I guess. One they observed as violent psychotic. James commented, President Eliot, the president of Harvard, President Eliot might not like to admit that there is no sharp line between himself and the men we have just seen, but it is true. We know that James himself suffered from severe depression on more than one occasion. I want to consider briefly two examples of James' great effort to be viciously fair-minded. Maybe just to put this in context, in chapters 6 and 7 of the book, he discusses what he calls sick souls, the religion of sick souls. Sick as in ill, the religion of sick souls. And that's in contrast to a religion he discussed earlier, healthy-minded religion. So for James, this is the way he divides them up, the religion of sick souls and the religion of the healthy-minded. In the religion of the healthy-minded, God is not a judge. He has nothing to judge. God is the animating spirit of a beautiful, harmonious world. God is the impersonation of kindness and beauty. These healthy souls have no sense of their own imperfection, of their own sinfulness. On the other hand, the religion of sick souls reflects a more morbid mind, burdened by the consciousness of sin and evil to a morbid degree. Just as the healthy-minded ignore evil's existence, the subject of the sick souls are often unable to see the existence of any good at all in their lives or the world. An example of the sick soul is Leo Tolstoy. Early in his life, in his adult life, Tolstoy was distressed by the lack of meaning in his life. He was marked by total disenchantment with life as he saw it. James himself expressed his sympathy for Tolstoy, that a man as powerful and full of faculty as he was should have endured such suffering. Over a period of 2 years, Tolstoy came to see that he had been living wrongly. He had been pursuing a life of personal ambition. He needed to simplify his life, get his soul in order. James observes that for Tolstoy, the process was one of redemption. The sufferer, when saved, is saved by a second birth, a deeper kind of consciousness than he could have enjoyed before. Another case that he gives of the sick soul, William James, is the Puritan John Bunyan, who was marked by, quote, a psychopathic temperament, sensitive of conscience to a diseased degree, a sick soul, right? Beset by doubts, fears, and insistent ideas. Bunyan wrote at one point in his autobiography, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, I was sorry that God had made me a man. The beasts, birds, fishes, I blessed their condition, for they had not a sinful nature. They were not obnoxious to the wrath of God. They were not going to hellfire after death. Bunyan was haunted by texts of Scripture for years until he gradually came to a conviction that Jesus Christ had not quite forsaken and cast off his soul. And he did come to a similar place of, I guess you could say, new birth to Tolstoy. Now, I find William James' conclusion to this all very interesting. James concludes this discussion of sick souls by saying, the fact of interest for us is that Tolstoy and Bunyan did find something welling up in the inner reaches of their consciousness by which such extreme sadness, by which it could be overcome. These 6 souls, as a result, were opened up to a profounder view of things. Their view of the world was more profound than the view of the world of healthy souls. The meaning of their life was much more profound than that of the sky blue, optimistic gospel of healthy souls. And then he goes on to say, and I quote, "The most complete religions are those in which the pessimistic elements are best developed. Buddhism and Christianity are the best known to us of these. They are essentially religions of deliverance. Man must die to an unreal life before he can be born into the real life." Now, Charles Taylor recently published a book entitled Varieties of Religion Today, William James Revisited, and that's also listed in your bibliography. And in his book, briefly, Taylor laments that William James is largely neglected by, I think, general audiences and scholars today. Taylor writes, "One of the things that makes James' book so remarkable is his wide sympathy, coupled with great phenomenological insight. That's why we go on reading his book. The unfortunate fact that James is neglected by contemporary academics may just show that wide sympathy and powers of phenomenological description are not qualities which the discipline has much room for at present." That's quite a statement. I'd be interested to know if my colleagues agree with that. Fortunately, I think there are still some religion scholars today who follow James' sympathetic approach to religion. And the example, I haven't got this on your handout, but there is an example, and this example is a woman named Kate Bowler. There was an article about her in Christianity Today just last week. She is 35 years old. Her father teaches religious studies at St. Mary's University in the Maritimes. She went on to do a PhD in the States, is now a professor of religion at Duke University. All right, 35 years old, young mother, young child. She published a book a couple of years ago entitled Blessed, A History of the American Prosperity Gospel, Oxford University Press. And I would suggest her book is marked by a heroic effort, just as heroic as William James, to correct stereotypes and to be sympathetic. She writes, "I spent 10 years interviewing televangelists with spiritual formulas for how to earn God's miracle money. I held hands with people in wheelchairs, being prayed for by celebrities known for their miracle touch. I sat in people's living rooms and heard about how they never could have dreamed of owning this home without the encouragement they heard on Sundays. I went on pilgrimage with the faith healer Benny Hinn and 900 tourists to retrace Jesus' steps in the Holy Land." Of course, the whole point was that Bowler wanted to get inside this movement and not have a superficial view of the movement. And of course, I think she succeeded greatly. Bowler came away from her study with an appreciation for the influence of this thinking among American evangelicals and for the appeal that it holds. Now, this is interesting. She writes, expressing her amazement at how American this movement is, its assumptions and its aspirations. The movement has consecrated America's culture of optimism. She points to the movement's important function in the lives of many American Christians as a source of hope, values, and personal improvement. I quote, "Prosperity gospel makes everyone feel special. It makes everyone feel uniquely chosen. Every detail of your life is God's ultimate concern. I've seen that do wonders for people. They really believe that God is making a difference in their everyday life, and they're willing to put in time praying, serving others, acting as if their life is a ladder to somewhere." This doesn't mean that Bowler doesn't see big problems in the movement and see some flaws. She observes that the prosperity gospel says you can always know God's will, and ultimately every experience you have in your life is either your reward or your fault. Everything can be traced back to some lack of faith or some act of faith. She observed the church was not able to stand around people who were sick and dying. Church members couldn't tell their suffering brothers and sisters that God was present in their suffering, not just in their triumphs. That's obviously a problem. She observes the prosperity gospel holds to the illusion of control until the end. If a believer gets sick and dies, shame compounds the grief. And I think what makes her scholarship even more poignant is that Kate Bowler, just a matter of weeks ago, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. She is dying at the age of 35. So this evening I have examined the fascination with religion that I grew up with and have retained, that is found, I think, everywhere in our society, and of course is present also at the university. I consider what present-day scholars are saying about how we should approach religion and offered my own convictions. I wouldn't say that. I think I'm putting different emphases than the Weebs and the McCutcheons would put in their study of religion. I think we do need to have empathy and respect. We do need to have curiosity. If we have these, I think as professors and as scholars, we will teach religion as we should and study religion as we should. So thanks for your attention. Tinu, I'll turn it over to you. This is for the videotape.
Thank you very much, Doug. So it's a real pleasure to be with you all this evening, especially on this occasion, to respond to my friend and colleague's thoughts on this important topic of how we study and teach religion in the university. It's even a greater honor to share the stage with him on his last lecture as chair of Christian thought. Excuse me. As Doug mentioned before, he's retiring from the chair this summer. He was appointed to the chair in 1999, so this marks his 17th year as the chair, by far the longest holder of the chair of Christian thought. During his time here, he's not only embodied the vision of the chair's founders, that is, to bring into conversation with Calgary's academic and faith communities the best of the world's scholarship in Christianity, but he's also stretched the chair's potential to be a catalyst for examining important issues of our day. During Doug's tenure, the chair has brought critical light to problems and questions with which we all now must engage, from poverty among families and especially youth, with its ripple effects in Calgary's homeless population, to religious radicalization in multicultural countries, and what those in prison for terrorist offenses can tell us about the forces of such violent radicalization, to important end-of-life issues, which are currently being debated in Parliament in our courts. The panels Doug has convened and the speakers he has invited prove the ongoing relevance and importance of religiously informed voices to our personal and communal lives. Through Doug's leadership, the chair has flowered into a unique and very successful example of cooperation and mutual support between town and gown, between the university and the community. And this is no small feat for those of you who know the rather fraught history of such engagement. We have all, inside and outside the university, benefited greatly from the activities of the chair as Doug has brought these to fruition. Doug has also embodied the vision of the chair in another way. Not only has he brought the best and brightest minds to Calgary, he has taken his rightful place among these thinkers. Professor Shantz has, over the last 17 years plus, made a very significant contribution to historical studies in Christianity, particularly in the important and growing field of pietist studies. Over the last few years, Doug has published 2 really seminal texts. In 2013, he brought out An Introduction to German Pietism, Protestant Renewal at the Dawn of Modern Europe, from Johns Hopkins Press, which won the Dale Brown Book Award for the Center for Anabaptist Pietist Studies, as well as being the subject of a plenary panel at an international meeting of German studies scholars. This was followed a year later by an edited collection, a companion to German Pietism, published by Brill, and along with the previous book on the life and work of the Pietist court preacher Konrad Brüsk, these texts have established Doug as a preeminent scholar of this movement. Lest you think that pietist studies sounds like a pretty specialized and arcane subject area, one of the pleasures of reading Doug's books is to see how this movement really set the stage for how the modern period in Europe could not have progressed, or could have progressed only because of this movement. Doug shows how a relatively small group of pious Christian reformers set the stage for the making of the modern self, as the subtitle of his next book puts it. It really is an amazing thesis. In these texts, Doug shows an encyclopedic curiosity married to the discipline and care of a true scholar. As one reads these books, one feels that one is in the presence of an incredibly learned and razor-sharp mind who graciously and kindly takes one on a lovely intellectual journey. I can think of no better example of great teaching of careful scholarship. Doug has exemplified these virtues with his many undergraduate and graduate students, having trained scholars who now take their own place in the academy. He has also been a stalwart colleague and a friend to we who are lucky enough to work alongside him. He is always a source of careful and kind advice and a very jolly companion in intellectual and not so intellectual conversation. He's also a soccer fan and enjoys a pint or two. So in short, he's the perfect academic. Now, having completed this valediction, it seems a little churlish now to be at all critical towards Doug's paper. So perhaps I should just respond by giving him the thumbs up and we can all go and have coffee and cookies. Luckily, I don't have to be very critical as I share many of his views. So in what remains of my time, I'd like to approach tonight's question from a slightly different perspective and along the way take up some of the points Doug has made. As will become evident, the question of how to study and teach religion is complex. As I had been reflecting on this question before having seen Doug's paper, my thoughts swirled across many different domains. As a philosopher by training and a still interested but now ex-scientist, my methodological biases are rather different from Doug's. I am very interested in trying to describe the nature of religion as well as its evolutionary purpose and form. Alloyed to this is my comparative post-colonial perspective, born of my own background, as well as my focus on Indian philosophy. All of this is to supply myself a caveat that I certainly don't claim to have the last word on this question, and that I might still raise more questions than I succeed in answering here tonight. My comments on this area are thus still reflecting an evolving view. So Professor Shantz identifies two main motivations in the study of religion: curiosity and respect. These he illustrates through considering a number of contexts in which such motivations are evident, both inside and outside the academic study of religion, as well as through reflecting on particular authors and thinkers who have written on this question. For Shantz, curiosity and respect must be held in constant tension, neither being allowed to overshadow the other. To verge too far on one pole would, as Shantz repeats, do a disservice to our students. I suspect Doug would agree that an over-reliance on one of these motivations would also unbalance our understanding and undermine the validity of our research. We are therefore necessarily caught in the middle between these two motivations. It should surprise no one that the twin poles of curiosity and respect evince Plato's insight that much of philosophy is a mediation between the one and the many. That is, between strains of thought which seek to consolidate, harmonize, integrate, and universalize on one hand, and those which, on the contrary, seek to safeguard the particular through disintegration, distinction, separation, and individuation. This tension, I suggest, is the hallmark of all serious fields of study and can be described as a dialectic between sets of analogous terms: curiosity and respect, the one and the many, self and other, identity and alterity, just to name a few. As such, curiosity may be related to a form of recognition and consolidation born of a childlike curiosity with the object of their fascination. while respect results from the disjunction and retreat evinced by the face of the other's particularity and incommensurability. Curiosity thus pulls us towards the religious object, while respect pushes us away from it. We are simultaneously drawn to the religious through a kind of recognition of something within the religious object or event, which is fundamentally similar yet interestingly different from the self, a form of redescribed self. But as we engage this mysterium tremendum et fascinans, to borrow Rudolf Otto's phrase, we are repelled by its indescribability, its fundamental otherness, which resists our homogenizing tendencies. I read in Doug's paper an acknowledgement of this tension, consonant with a reluctance and even a duty to avoid an all too easy acquiescence to the comforts of dogmatic adherence to only one side of the dialectic. And I agree with Doug's insight that to teach and study religion, one must forever tread a razor's edge between the opposing certainties, both naturalistic and theological. Within this tension, one must temper empathetic solidarity with the believer or the religious community. We must temper this with a critical skepticism and a wary eye for bad faith. On the other side, we must also eschew the reductionistic dismissal of subjective and necessarily private claims to religious experience through a fierce commitment to common humanity mediated by an open and humble mind. One must neither drink the Kool-Aid of an uncritical theology nor die of thirst in the desert of naturalistic positivism. Of course, this view of tension must also admit that the dialectical poles have legitimate claims and authentic concerns. To remain on the knife edge does not entail that we can afford to ignore the claims of each side. Shantz notes as much when he accepts both Wiebe and McCutcheon make valid points in their critiques of religious studies in the vein of Coward, Cantwell Smith, and Grant. The proponents of theologically informed or perhaps theologically constituted studies of religion, what Schleiermacher called Glaubenslehre, too easily allows for the axiomatic structures of doctrine to erect some kind of firewall against any potential critique. Moreover, such studies often rely on an ineffable religious experience to buttress their anti-scientific and anti-realistic claims. McCutcheon and Wiebe are right to call foul against these rhetorical moves, since justifying religious beliefs and practices through reliance on an ineffable something I know not what creates a black hole from which rationality cannot escape. Literally anything is logically consistent with the ineffable transcendent, and thus the very idea must be rejected if we are to get any purchase on religion. Well, McCutcheon and Wiebe have a point. I think Shantz might have let Wiebe's vitriol off too lightly. For instance, Wiebe's suggestion that scholars and students of religion should function as scientific naturalists betrays a category mistake. Wiebe entertains a very biological view of the study of religion. As religious naturalists, we would classify, collect, and describe the phenomena of religion, much as one would classify, describe, and collect beetles in the back garden and birds on the Galapagos. Were human constructs things in the universe, such as beetles and birds, this would make some sense. However, religions as constructs of what people do, as described both inside and outside religion, are not such things. Whatever religions are, they are not akin to things we can collect in specimen jars. One might see religions as structures, events, interpretations, delusions, or a wide variety of other possible things, other possibilities. But few would claim that they are objects in the universe. The organizing metaphor of Wiebe's description is thus faulty. Now, this is not to say that we can't describe and classify what we observe when we encounter religion, but we should, I think, look for a different metaphor. I shall suggest one later on. And even if we grant that Weeb does not intend religious phenomena to be reified things in the universe, he still falls prey to the necessary reduction inherent in all scientific methods, namely that the subjective experience of the religious participant is either systematically bracketed or reduced to one measurable variable among others. This is tantamount to denying the motivating force of subjective awareness of that participant. And without this, it's difficult to give an adequate account of his or her agency. Not only are the subjectivities of the religious adherent deprecated, so too are those of the social scientific observer. Without going into a detailed discussion of the epistemology implicit in Weeb's arguments, suffice it to say that this positivistic underpinning of his program is dubious at best. Philosophers of religion have now more or less agreed that positivistic naturalism as a basis for the academic study of religion is really a non-starter. In this light, Weeb's anger towards Coward seems to stem from Coward not sharing Weeb's own set of biases, which of course, for him, he argues, ought to be normative. McCutcheon also gets off a bit lightly. While I think Doug and I would agree that we must respect and try to understand the subjective experience of those whom we study, this does not entail that they get to set the categories, ground rules, and vocabularies with which we describe and analyze their discourses. As McCutcheon argues, the scholar must be free to apply the categories and methods that she or he deems best for his or her purposes. This is again a difficult balancing act, for we do not want to denature the phenomena that we are studying through incautious use of theoretical tools of the trade, but neither can we trade in our tools for those of the religious adherent or the tradition. To do so would cross the line between theology and religious studies. McCutcheon rightly warns that we must always be free to be critical and uncover, quotes, the social and political motivations and mechanisms of power and control behind many religious phenomena. Now that said, I can't help but note that his zeal to maintain this critical distance, McCutcheon denigrates the potential for religious discourses to manipulate its adherents towards positive ends. While religion can hide power politics and social constructs, so too can it motivate individuals and communities to useful and positive purposes. McCutcheon argues that religious studies scholars use a hermeneutics of suspicion in our study and teaching of religion, but he neglects to consider the hermeneutics of recovery. That is, a post-critical reconciliation of religious discourses with their broader communities. Such a recovery would, to use William James's term, be a way to become partially healthy-minded after the dark night of the sick soul. My reference to James brings me to Doug's own valuation of him, and I was very pleased to see Doug approvingly refer to James's varieties of religious experience. Like Charles Taylor, I too find in James an exemplary model of studying and teaching religion. James's viciously fair-minded treatment of the wide and frankly sometimes bizarre variety of religious experiences reveals a fundamental solidarity with human being as well as a laudable humility with respect to making judgments. What I like about James, apart from his extremely pithy definition of religion, is, as Taylor notes, his wide sympathy and powers of phenomenological description. James takes as a given that the experiences he describes so clearly are those of people who are not, despite appearances to the contrary, unlike himself. That the varieties of religious experiences are, whatever we make of them, legitimate for those who authentically have them. These experiences are often transformative and provide a cornerstone for the lives of the experiencer. While we should be cautious about the use to which these experiences and discourses are put, the fact that many people authentically have them minimally deserves our curiosity and respect. They are the kinds of events that we ourselves are at least liable to have, As fellow human beings, we should approach their study with some degree of humility, along with our critical faculties. Now, humility is perhaps a synonym for Doug's virtue of respect in the academic study of religion. And I prefer the use of the term humility because it better coincides with most religious traditions' prohibitions of idolatry. Here we see interior religious versions of the virtue of respect, which we bring from an external academic perspective. It seems to me that what this prohibition is really talking about is not merely a ban on the production of divine images or icons, but rather the broader hubris of attempting to certify the divine or transcendent according to human categories. To possess the transcendent in this way mutates both the religious object of reverence as well as the human nature of those who do so. Idolatry thus points to the double-edged nature of our conceptual tools and categories as they are applied to religion. It also hints at an alternative metaphor for thinking about religion, one which develops and clarifies this double-edged characteristic. And it's to this that I shall now briefly turn. Now, one way to define religion has been to think about it as function. So religion has been defined as, for instance, functioning as a social glue, according to Durkheim. Quotes, "A religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, that is to say, things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite into a single moral community called a church, all of those who adhere to them." So religions are all about building communities. Durkheim suggests that the essence of religion is community creation. And it has been justly criticized on a number of fronts, but I don't intend here to try to defend him. However, from this functional definition, I want to stretch it a little bit further to derive a more general notion of religion, not as a tool for community creation or individual transformation or what have you, but rather as a tool or a technology per se. I want to briefly explore what it might mean for our study and teaching of religion if we think of religion as a technology. Now, immediately we have to ask the question, what is technology? And you might think that this is rather obvious. Technology is that thing we have in our pockets with which we email, Facebook, and tweet. But of course, this is just one particular form of technology. Most broadly, technology is any tool, either physical, mental, social, or algorithmic, used to produce some desired result. Technology is one way in which humans engage with the world in order to get what we want, avoid what we don't want, and manipulate our environments for some non-instrumental purpose such as play. In this sense, technology encompasses all the physical tools and the gadgets we surround ourselves with in order to engage with the environment in desired ways, but also non-physical, conceptual, and structural creations. So not only are hammers and iPhones tools, so are clothing, universities, languages, myths, movies, and governments. And when it comes to religions, I want to suggest that we must go even deeper to understand the nature of technology. The now somewhat infamous 20th century philosopher Heidegger wrote an essay on the question of technology. And this, I think, holds some interesting suggestions for religion seen as technology. In the essay, Heidegger offers a strong critique of technology understood as mere instruments, that is, tools through which we engage the world. Now, no doubt, we cannot avoid such instrumental uses. But treating technology as only a means to an end, that is, or treating technology as merely a means to an end, presents us with a world which is for us, a storehouse of things waiting for our use. Technology instrumentalizes the world such that, according to Heidegger, the true nature of the world is hidden, it's obfuscated. The tree is merely a standing pile of lumber. The doctor merely a functionary through which we try to develop or maintain health. The university merely a structure through which we get a degree. or religion simply a form of life by which we approach heaven? Heidegger warns us that such instrumental notions of technology inevitably trap us on the surface of the world and of ourselves. The true nature of technology, he holds, is emphatically not instrumental. Rather, it is a mode of being or revealing. Now, I won't go into all of the technicalities of Heidegger's thought here. A shortcut might be found, however, in the Greek origin of the word technology, that is, techne. Usually translated as skill, craftsmanship, craft, or art, for Heidegger, techne relates more to the process through which a skilled craftsman or artisan brings forth, manifests, or makes real that on which they labor. I'll read that again. It relates more to the process through which a skilled craftsman or artisan brings forth, manifests, or makes real that on which they labor. Techne is a kind of bringing forth, a revealing of that which was only potential into being in the world. This revealing is in some ways a kind of giving birth, not out of nothing at all, but out of chaos or potentiality into a more stable order. Moreover, the revealing is sometimes thought of as a process through which the artisan acts only as a kind of midwife, helping the thing or the being reveal itself, but not really creating anything that wasn't there in the first place. The artisan or the technologist, in our case, is thus a conduit through which the thing itself comes to be. Ironically, the technologist thus becomes the tool through which the thing is created, or through which being is revealed. This is where I think religion as a technology might be instructive. Religion as technology gets at the idea that religion is reality revealing itself. It is not the only way this is done, and we might imagine various religious traditions to be particular flavors of technology. And before we think of religions merely as ways through which humans engage reality, Heidegger shows us that it is just as true to say that religions use us to unmask itself. Religion, then, is a hybrid, mediating our engagement with reality and reality's engagement with us. Or perhaps more accurately, being's self-revelation through particular beings. So being, big B, self-revelation through little b beings, particular things. Now I realize that this is heavy going. You guys are looking like some of my students after a lecture on Heidegger. But Heidegger does get at something I have seen in other traditions I've studied. That is, our simultaneous agency and complicity in the unfolding of reality. We are double agents. The study and teaching of religions needs to remain firmly on the razor's edge between curiosity and respect, between the one and the many. But the view from this edge reveals to us a unique perspective as both users of religion as well as its tools. Like Wittgenstein's image of the duck rabbit, the same thing can simultaneously be two things. As we see ourselves as the users of social technology of religion, our status as religion's tools immediately becomes obvious. Neither is false, and we are left in this fundamental tension. Ultimately, I think it is this tension that we must face. It is in this tension that we must face ourselves in coming to understand and be understood by religion. And it is this tension that we must show to our students. Thank you. So we have some time for questions. Perhaps if you wouldn't mind, first of all, making sure that your questions are relatively brief and to the point. And if you could either stand up or raise your voice so everybody can hear, the floor is open.
sitting here listening, thought came to mind. I think people who are criticizing religion as not being objective are treating religion differently than they treat every single other academic field. I'll pass on my politically incorrect example, but I would say, for instance, I don't know of anyone who went into engineering not thinking that they want to create or develop something, or somebody who went into music who doesn't play an instrument and express themselves in music, and into education and say don't be biased and show how you teach, just analyze, critically thinking without experimenting, without having experience. You know, study psychology but don't want to be a counselor. There's no personalness to it. I'm an exercise physiologist, you know. My favorite sports psychology professor is the one who helps the national team athlete win at a downhill ski event. You know, the percentage of the high-performing athletes. My favorite exercise therapist is one of the best cardiac rehab people. So I'm just wondering, like these people that are saying that religion has to be more critically thinking and you have to take the personal out of it, I'm just wondering how they do that in all the other areas of their life.
Good points, Amy. And it is a tension. We don't promote religion in the religious studies department. That would be an inappropriate use of our position as professors. So, you know, I think you're right. I like the way Pelican put it, that the study of religion in the university can be a great threat to religion, but it can also have the consequence that students are inspired to pursue things further in their personal life. And that possibility is always there. So I think you're right about that point.
Other comments or questions? Yes.
First of all, thanks to both of you. It's often said, and I think it's probably true, that of all the modern, developed world, North America is the most religious. Certainly I've said the U.S., and I expect includes Canada as well. I'm wondering if you have reflections on why that is, and also how does that pertain to the academic study of religion, both in terms of, say, differences between North American religious studies and, say, European or other. And also, if I'm not asking too much, if you could sort of speculate on the future of how that might develop. Maybe that's too much for something there.
I defer to the historian.
Yeah. I guess, David, I would not speak of North America, homogeneously. I think the U.S. and Canada are two very different places, historically and in terms of the present. I guess the advance of religious institutional decline is much more rapid in Canada than it is in the States. We are more like Europe in many ways. In the last, I think, 10 to 15 years, the number of those who are agnostic about religion has doubled in Canada. It's about 25% right now, according to the Angus Reid poll. So we are quite different than the U.S. And yet, having said that, when I go to Germany, there you have theology in the universities, and they find the very fact that we have religious studies departments instead of theology departments, they find that kind of odd. So the irony then is that this supposedly secular European setting still has a kind of state-sponsored study of theology. So it's an odd situation. The future is a good question, and I wish I knew. I like to think that things are cyclical, and we are maybe same as the price of oil. Maybe there is a downturn, but there's going to be an upturn. I think many of us noted that after 9/11 there was an upturn, right? In the interest in religion in our society, and I think even in student enrollments in our courses. So I refuse to be a pessimist. I think there's a tendency for us those of us that are retiring, to talk about the good old days, and I refuse to do that. I think there are great times ahead. I would encourage people to pursue graduate study and be optimistic.
Just to add a little bit, as Doug mentioned, there's been a general decline in the humanities over the last 10 or 15 years, particularly in Canada. However, in the last 3 years, we've seen a uptick again, a trajectory upwards in our student numbers. And so that bodes well, I think, for the fact, as Doug said, that religion is still, of wide interest to people in the world, as it were. Now, that's not to say that it's always the same within university systems. As head, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, perhaps we should turn that camera off for a moment. It seems to me that in promoting the study of religion, the academic study of religion, some of my largest or biggest adversaries have been within universities. So we have the situation in which students are very interested, communities outside are very interested. Numbers seem to be cyclical and they're starting to go up again, but we find ourselves at odds with our scientific and social scientific and sometimes humanistic colleagues just as much as the Dawkinses of the world. Right. Maybe one more question and then we'll wind it down for coffee and cookies.
I'm a Christian pastor, and from time to time I have the opportunity to advise teenagers as they're approaching post-secondary education. And they often feel a choice between pursuing religious education and professional education. I know that's not their dichotomy. And I sometimes wonder about how I can advise them if they're going to take the more academic route. How do they find themselves in a situation where the religious studies that are happening in that academy are done from a positive sense of curiosity, as we say. I have a positive curiosity about ski jumping. It's bravery and courage, and I admire it whether or not I ever try it. And I have curiosity about why someone would vote for a political candidate that I was saying. Right? Those are positive and negative curiosity. So how do I, what kind of a question, or how do I push people towards places for religion when we study with a positive curiosity?
Go ahead.
Tinu is so deferential.
This isn't my last lecture.
I guess I would say keep in mind, or you call it positive curiosity. See, that's not what I was saying in my lecture tonight. There is a place for negative curiosity. And I guess if there's any challenge I would bring to churches, it's maybe to do a better job of preparing students for the wider religious world in which we live. I think one of the best arguments for religious studies is that this is the world we live in. And unfortunately, religious ignorance, is, I think, the biggest cause of religious strife. And what is the answer to religious ignorance? Here we are. We're offering courses in Hinduism and Buddhism and the afterlife from all these different perspectives. And students are not going to be affirmed in their belief system. I don't think they'll be dissuaded from their belief system. I would look at it as a wonderful opportunity to broaden their minds as to what is out there religiously. And so that would be my argument. They should go expecting to hear things they haven't heard, for even their own faith to be treated from a perspective that's different. I mean, pastor's job isn't necessarily to talk about, the age of gospel writings and the genre of gospel writings. That's what they'll do here. If that's threatening, that's too bad. That's just curiosity running away with itself, and that's legitimate. But the positive side of it is learning about all these traditions that are outside the Christian world and that they're going to encounter sooner or later. I've had students in my office, identifying Christian students, and they're saying, nobody ever told me about this. See, that's the big threat. When for some reason, it seems to be there's an advantage to ignorance. And if churches give that impression, you're not doing young people a favor. They need to be encouraged. They need to be told it's not a choice between curiosity and faith. Your faith should be strong enough to open itself to what's out there in that broad world and all the different traditions that are there. So that's kind of the apologetic I would use for the study that we're doing. Well, I want to thank you for coming, and it has gone longer than our events usually go, but it's been a privilege to serve Calgary.